Hello, welcome back to the channel. Trying something new with the whiteboard. It's kind of fun. You get to draw on it and do different interactive stuff. And I'm using it for my other channel, Tech Tips. And I'll be discussing low voltage technological questions and electrical troubleshooting, and it'll be a lot of fun. So I'm going to leave a link to the new channel down in the description. Be sure to check it out. Today, just going to do a quick topic that I think is somewhat original, and I think it's actually a decent argument. We're going to be comparing Marco Polo and the writings of the famous traveler Marco Polo and the Synoptic Gospels and the argument for the historical basis for the Synoptic Gospels. Now, people that are apologists for the Gospels will say they are historical, they're real people. There's multiple corroborations from contemporary historians that say Jesus was a real person, and Pontius Pilate and all these Roman governors were real people, and the locations, the cities were real, so somehow therefore this points to the Gospels being accurate historically. And so what we're going to do is just show you a little comparison to kind of apply that logic to other things and see how far that takes us and where we go with it. So just for a baseline, we're going to mention some interesting facts in both these accounts. Now, for those of you who don't know Marco Polo, he was an Italian that left when he was 17 and traveled with his father and uncle over to Asia. They spent allegedly some time with Kublai Khan, toured most of the countryside in Asia. They went throughout China, and supposedly they met with the Mongols. They visited islands in the South Pacific. There's a large book of his tales that's fairly popular, and most people are aware of it. But Marco Polo mentions magicians in the courts of Kublai Khan. Magicians that were able to levitate jars of wine and flagons of wine, whatever you want to call it, made the tables hover, and just, he had astrologers that could control the weather from the rooftops of the palace. These are clearly outlandish, wild fabrications. I mean, no one actually believes that kind of stuff. Some people do, but we're not going to go there. Small inconsistencies. There was a city in China that he describes as having 12,000 bridges. Another city has 15 gates. Another city has this. He mentions a lot of these different descriptions of real world places, and because of our knowledge of the history of those places and the archaeology and the writings and the historical accounts from those civilizations, we know that a lot of Marco Polo's descriptions are slightly inaccurate. They're exaggerations or simply fabrications that we can't prove. He claims to have found islands with where they dig out red pearls from the clams, and there were barbaric tribes where people had tails, and just weird, stupid stuff that we cannot demonstrate as real from Marco Polo's accounts. Now, we have similar issues with the Gospels. In the book of Luke, there's a census taken that is supposedly by order of Augustus, the Roman leader at the time. So the issue is there was no such census that took place in that time period, and we can't reconcile this. Supposedly there was a census taken under Herod the Great, but he died 9 years before the birth of Jesus, or there was, I'm trying to think how it went, but essentially the facts of history don't match up with the census. The census never took place. It couldn't have. And there's armies of apologists that just go back and forth with different theories, but absolutely nobody has a real grasp on what actually happened. The book of Matthew, we have an account of zombies. This is only taking place in Matthew, does not mention in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or in Mark, Luke, or John. Essentially, the graves were opened, and the saints left their tombs, their graves, and went into the holy city, and were seen of many. Now, this is not mentioned not only in the three Gospels, but also nowhere else in history. You would think dozens or perhaps hundreds of people just climbing out of their graves and walking around, this would be noticeable by other people. Certainly, the famous historian Josephus would have mentioned something of that magnitude. And certainly the questions are raised, where did they go after that? Did they all just fall over 24 hours later? Did they continue to live out another 5-6 years and then died again? What happened to the records of that time? There's a lot of problems when zombies rise from their graves in a single instance. And of course, small errors. There's some interesting, weird stuff that goes on, like Jesus traveling with 12 of his disciples in a ship to an island where they meet the man from Gadarenes. There's an account, and it might be in Luke, but the pigs are driven off a steep cliff. Problem being, there's no steep cliffs in that area. The city mentioned is actually like 5 miles from the ocean, so these pigs would have had to ran just a marathon to get to the actual water. There wasn't water right there. And in the gospel, there's 2 different cities mentioned. They're in different geographic regions. One gospel mentions that same account of the demon-possessed man, and they mention a town that's like 20 miles from the other town mentioned in the other gospel. And little small inconsistencies and discrepancies like that. So let's recap. Marco Polo and the Synoptic Gospels, these are written 1,000 years apart. So Marco Polo was he was born in 1245, I think. So his book was written just before the 1300s, probably 1275, 1285, somewhere in there. And Synoptic Gospels, about AD 50 to AD 85. I mean, there's different dates getting thrown around, but definitely not before AD 50 and not after AD 95. So in both of these, we have real people. No one doubts that Marco Polo was real. No one doubts that he went to Asia. And some people doubt that, but for the most part, people accept that him, his father, his uncle, they traveled to Asia. They definitely looked at real cities. They met with real people. They did these travels, and they described things that are accurate in that time period. China had paper money in that time period, which blew the minds of the Europeans. They just didn't understand the concept of having paper be valued the same as gold and silver. Like, it was just kind of like, that was a new concept at that time period. So yes, there's real things that happen. Real things happened in the Gospels. So what can we draw from this? What's the point of this video and this discussion? It's really simple. We can believe that Marco Polo was a real person. We can believe that there was real events, real areas that he went to, real cities, but we don't have to necessarily buy the story that the Chinese magicians could levitate flagons of wine, and they could control the weather, and just, we don't have to buy all the math and every last description down to the last detail. We don't. Because even if Marco Polo had 4 other people, which we know the Synoptic Gospels were not all independent. Matthew and Luke drew from Mark's account, and they copied most of that, and they added their own. John drew some from all 3, blah, blah, blah. These aren't 4 original stories, but even if we had 4, writers. Marco Polo wrote his story, his father's uncle wrote their own stories, whatever. No matter how many people write about it, the magicians are not going to be real, because we have no reason to think that. We don't have magicians today. We don't have astrologers today that can control the weather. No matter how many people write about it, the city is not going to have 12,000 bridges. It's not going to have 12 gates. There's not going to be an island with red pearls and people with tails. No matter how many different individual sources we have, those facts will still be wrong. Now, no matter how many people write about an event in the Gospels, no matter, we could have 100, we could have 1,000 people that corroborate the events in the Gospels, the census would still be wrong. We don't have anything that's going to line up in history with that census. The zombies, look, people don't crawl out of the graves en masse, and we don't have any historical corroboration of that at all. So no matter what you do, there might be real people, there might be real places, but if you don't buy Marco Polo's story, okay, if you read the accounts of Marco Polo and you say, oh, he definitely didn't get an accurate description of this city, he definitely didn't have people controlling the weather, he definitely didn't have this. If you don't buy this completely, as wrong as it is, you have no reason to buy this, to accept these outlandish claims, because it's the same thing. One guy writing a story, a couple guys writing a story. It's the same with, we've got people telling about how they got abducted by UFOs. If one guy writes a book saying he got abducted by a UFO, and he gives a list and a description, and there's all these details, and 10 other people write books about being abducted by UFOs, they're real people. They live in real places. But the specific event can be completely fabricated. And you know what? That's the way it should be. We can say, yes, Luke and Matthew, Jesus, these are real people. They lived in real places. They got things wrong. It's that simple. If 100 people verified what Marco Polo wrote about, it would still be wrong. That's what's called being objective, and that's what's called using the evidence versus just accepting someone's story. And that's all we have for the Gospels. It's someone's story written in a book that in many ways has discrepancies against the historical account. Therefore, we have no reason to just accept everything written as it is. That's just complete nonsense. So the next time a Christian says, oh, we can trust the Gospels because they all corroborate each other, and there's real cities, and there's real people, and they all disagree in little bits because they're individual tales, and we've got 13,000 fragments of manuscript, and this has been copied, and it changed the world, blah, blah, blah. Just point them back to Marco Polo and say, okay, do you believe everything he wrote? Because it's the same thing. The guy wrote a book, and yeah, there's some details that are off, but we have to base our reality on evidence. We cannot just say, somebody wrote it down, therefore we have to believe it. Anything else is playing favorites and saying, I will accept this outlandish claim because I want to. And that's being intellectually dishonest. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great one. Be sure to like, subscribe, check out the other YouTube channel, and I'll put links for the podcast and the blog just in case you feel like it. Do your homework. Have a great one.